Well, hey, thank you so much for having me. ISSM, thank you very much for extending the invitation. I'm going to try to roll through this as quick as I can. I've done this lecture or parts of it before. I've done deeper dives in the industry and as far as the quality control and adulteration. So I'm going to do a speed round here for you. So I want to say this up front is that if you have questions at the end that we don't get to, or if I fly through something, by all means, reach out to me. My contact information I have on the last slide, or you can usually find me on any of the social media things at Dr. Chris Lockwood. Um, so with dietary supplements, we obviously have, we have a lot of confirmation bias that occurs in our space. We see it all the time. And a lot of that just comes down to just a lack of perspective and lack of understanding of what the companies actually have to follow. And so if you're not familiar truly with the history of the industry, there's a lot of things that are defined as adulteration, or that you might believe to be problematic, but by definition and what the FDA requires of the industry, hopefully at the end of this, you'll see it's a little bit different perspective, maybe not quite so black and white here. So today's lesson really about perspective. And I got two main things I want to teach you here is that we're going to do some basics for researchers and practitioners on dietary supplements. If you see me use DS, that's just dietary supplement. And then adulteration for the adults in the room is really what I want to get at, just so that we all kind of leave here on the same page. And then also I'll give a little bit of call to action for researchers as well. So a couple things here. So true or false. First thing you see a lot, right? I mean, so I don't have you in front of me here to get answers, but dietary supplement industry is not regulated. We see this a lot in media. We hear this a lot all the time. If you answered true to that, you were wrong. So it is false. The dietary supplement industry is regulated. This is directly from the FDA's site. This is a quote from that page. FDA regulates both finished dietary supplement products and dietary ingredients. These are just two of the guidelines, that we as a dietary supplement industry are under. There's so many others. The Food Safety Modernization Act, or otherwise known as FSMA, FSMA, just got amended again for adulteration, intentional adulteration. I mean, and so there are a lot of rules, and so you're going to see me keep referring to automobile laws for this, similar to what we have. There's a lot of rules on the books, and then it really comes down to enforcement, right? I mean, so if you're not familiar with DSHEA, Dietary Supplement Health Education Act of 1994, this is just a really brief speed round through some of the key markers that you should be aware of. If you're a researcher or a practitioner, or a strength coach, and just so you can identify what is or isn't a dietary supplement. One of the most important things that happens a lot is you see things marketed as dietary supplements or making very strong structure function claims, that it does, take this, it does this. But dietary supplements must be consumed orally, and they have to pass through the digestive system. So topicals, out of the question. There's which is a common one. Other types of sprays and things, mists, which are starting to come out. Unless on the instructions it says and swallow for like sublinguals. I mean, those also kind of fall into a gray area. But there's several different elements. The red highlighted section that I've got here are some things that you should really be aware of. Dietary supplements are a subclass of foods. Infant formula is a subclass of foods. And we don't tend to hear the same adulteration concerns with infant formula, but they are a subset of foods. And so by definition, infant formula has to follow a lot of these same requirements. They must contain ingredients present in the food supply, approved food additives, GRAS substances, what we call ODIs, old dietary ingredients that, prior to DSHEA that had a long history of use, or through this new an NDI, a new dietary ingredient application process, which essentially works like a pre-approval. And so you have to give prior notice to the FDA if you're going to use something that doesn't fall within one of these other requirements. And so also when DSHEA was enacted, and then supplement and then addendums that have been added to it since, good manufacturing practices. So the GMPs came in line in 2007, started with large companies. So like my first entries running brands, I worked for what used to be Weeder Nutrition back when they were a thing. Joe Weeder over my shoulder here was one of my early mentors. And so, American Bodybuilding was the first brand I took over and ran. Joe Weeder's company was the first company to be made an example in the industry. The second company I must have been, just wanting to get beat down as I went to GNC and ran their diet, energy, food, and beverage division. They're your second company to get hit after all these new laws came in line, right? And so with what was called a consent decree. And so regulatory compliance has been something I've kind of grown up with. But in 2007, the FDA began enforcing the new GMPs. It started with large companies, your GNCs of the world, at the time. And then by 2010, all companies had to be adhering to the new good manufacturing practices. And so, and that's going to come in important here in a second when I bring up something else that brings some perspective to what you see in the literature and out in mainstream media. And so, the FDA also has significant enforcement, authority, which a lot of people fail to recognize or they choose to overlook by believing that we're not a regulated industry. Again, I'm for people like Doug Kalman or Rick Collins or others that this is what you do every day. I'm flying through this, and I know I'm missing a lot of other things, but that's for a different lecture. So there are, I'm not saying, because we do have laws, it's not to say that there aren't a lot of abusers. I've done consulting, off and on, for the most part since around 2005 when I went back for a PhD or started, back for a PhD. And then, and I will say, I mean, I often use this term, and it's 90%, there's of the companies that are out there, there are a large percentage that I've been, and then this goes for foods as well, but for dietary supplements that are not following the regulations that are required of them. What I have found is that a large, probably I'm using a loose number, but of the thousands of companies that I've consulted with and have worked with and spoken with over the years, or provided regulatory support as an expert as I went back and did more on the research side, is just that about 50% of them just aren't aware of the laws that they are required, or they assume somebody else is handling them. And so you see a lot of the adulterated, under the GMPs, those come up a lot. Those are the most common. And I'm going to show you a website you can go to. You can see these things in real time when they achieve a certain level of concern. But other things that commonly are abused are adverse event, serious adverse event reporting isn't being done properly. Section 6 notifications, as we call them, is, your claim substantiation, is it real? Is it, can you use this? Most companies are not filing this information. NDI pre-market notifications, I mean, that's a whole nother area. And there is a new NDI guidance that FDA has just published as well. I'm not going to get into that today. And so, but for some point of reference from a testing standpoint, because if we're concerned with adulteration, you should compare apples to apples here, right? I mean, so just when we look at analytical testing in particular, ingredients, dietary supplements, absolutely, it's required before use and production. I mean, for foods, there is, if you look at 21 CFR 110.8, I mean, other than the FSMA, kind of loophole changes that have recently made, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but dietary supplements do have higher enforcement requirements from a standpoint of ensuring that the identity, potency, purity, and composition of those active ingredients before they go into production are what they say they are. Finished products, same thing. You see this, that there is a requirement for, again, that the specifications for that product are met analytically. And then as far as the facilities where these products are made, also there are significantly more requirements, but there are exemptions in the food side. And so just to be aware of those. And so I'm not to try to make you fearful of the food you eat, but just be aware that dietary supplements by law, by the regulations, there's a lot of testing that should be going into it, right? And so you say, okay, well, but wait, I mean, just because there are those laws, right? I mean, if somebody violates them, the FDA doesn't have that authority. And if you paid attention to my earlier one, that there are laws in place that gave FDA significant authority above and beyond, you'll know that this is a false statement, as they do absolutely. And thanks to my good friend Rick Collins and his legal firm, I ran this past him before when I first started adding this into my slides, and so thank you, Rick, if you're watching. But again, just kind of the civil and criminal enforcement capability the FDA has based on how egregious that crime is. In my experience, FDA has always been very good. They come in with guns and a badge when they audit your facility, and as long as you have a lot of your ducks in a row and you're respectful, it tends to go pretty well. We all see the examples when it doesn't. And so for companies that are not doing what they're supposed to, not aware, and get very belligerent when they don't want to accept responsibility. But you say, well, okay, they're not doing this, or they're not doing it very often. FDA, comes back to the point that they have 5 moral imperatives for the FDA. The first one is when you see the FDA, truly take action against something, an adulterant or something that's egregious, and you say, well, why are they only doing it from time to time? And it really comes down to the DSHEA. Ever since DSHEA was enacted, it's never been fully enforced because the FDA has never been fully funded. Congress has never fully funded them. You consistently see, and I would definitely advise you to get involved if you at all like your liberties, to be able to have access and choice on what you consume and make it affordable, is get involved with the NPA. You'll see, as far as new laws that are put out there, or laws that are being proposed to remove those rights or add extra hurdles, but the FDA has never enacted the basic ones, which would secure a lot of the problems that exist. Maybe there's a recent one on that they want, the full registration. Well, if companies were doing Section 6 notifications like they're required, then and submitting new product claims substantiation, then they would have that database. FDA has been consistently underfunded and undermanned in that area, and so they tend to only jump in when there is some kind of health hazard. Some of you might remember when kratom got pulled from the market, and this was the reason why. It was in 2018. It was the only dietary supplement in years that had risen to the level of the CDC having complaints. This was a case of those companies that were bringing this material in weren't doing their quality control testing like they were required. And so these raw materials were making it into production. And I can't remember if it was salmonella or what the bacterial contaminant that was present, but a real simple test that could have prevented that. And from these, 50 hospitalizations and 199 sick. But when you look at just the top ones, and I just pulled out some from that year, kratom was the only dietary supplement ingredient that year that even hit the CDC's radar. And you say, well, wow, I mean, there were 0 deaths, there's 199 sick, and they removed it from the industry, right? I mean, so they did take action. Kind of surprising. I still do see honey smack cereal on the market, but that's not getting pulled. So it is worth noting here, right? I mean, why are there so many, adverse events that we see and recalls that we see from foods that are sold in grocery? And it's because there's no mandatory adverse event reporting. Your grocery store, I bring it up to my wife all the time to an annoyance, is that, when you buy something and it's moldy or bad, we've gotten in such the habit of just, we throw it out. We're like, yeah, we go back to the grocery store instead of, in the dietary supplement side, and I'm going to give you a little bit of understanding why adverse events are so high in dietary supplements is A, there's mandatory reporting, and B, the definition of adverse events is beyond what you might assume. It's not just getting sick. And so, this is from CRN. It's a little bit modified. Pre-market approval, I just kind of add this little note here for dietary supplements is that for new dietary ingredients, technically, you could say that is a pre-market notification that is required that FDA has to see. So, but over again, when you compare against foods, and I left other categories out, and it's again, not to make you scared of foods, but just to be realistic on what is and isn't required. Dietary supplements have a lot of rules in place that should be followed and should have those protections if people are following what they should do. To put adverse events and serious adverse events in perspective, right? And by the way, the difference between an adverse event and serious adverse event, an SAE, a serious adverse event, means you went to the doctor, the emergency room, or the morgue. That's really what shifts it over to an SAE is that there is an actual medical visit that is required because of something. And you see it a lot is that there are case reports of people that go to the doctor. They also are taking a dietary supplement. That dietary supplement gets added into that, kind of list of multiple things they're taking. And because it's a dietary supplement, not just a food, it gets added as an SAE because that patient went to the doctor. So, but when you broke it down and when I look at, the year 2018, again, and I could do this for any year and you see the same kind of trends is that, a mandatory adverse event reporting is required for dietary supplements, not for food or cosmetics is something to pay attention to. But when you go to the third column and you look at total serious adverse events relative to the total adverse events, it's a very low number in dietary supplements. So, be aware that animal supplements are added into that number, the reporting through that open database. Whereas for foods, there's so many different exclusions, right? And so I think from a safety standpoint, we have to keep these things in perspective as well. You definitely see more adverse events and serious adverse events through food. And that's a numbers game too. There's just more people eating obviously than taking supplements, but just so that nobody, thinks that the problem is worse than it may be. Keep in mind, adverse events is a very broadly defined term from a quality control standpoint. So in our quality departments, I would ask that if you happen to be easily influenced by, the retail partners, spiff program to push you to buy a product, and you get home and your spouse or loved one makes fun of you and you decide you want to return it, just return it and tell them you bought it and didn't mean to. Don't tell them you got sick off it or it tasted bad. That creates a whole nother area of adverse event reporting for the brands that follow the laws. So adverse event is anything. It can be a quality problem. That can mean that the label was messed up. There wasn't a scoop in the powder container. And so I kind of give this example here, right? A customer complaint, it tasted bad. I wanted to throw up. That's, an adverse event, non-serious. We, labeled under nausea. If you're using, a kind of a classic GMP compliance, and that dietary supplement, you got to notify the FDA if there's any serious adverse event reports, and anything in connection with that for up to a period of years too. Again, foods don't have to, and that's why you tend to see, problems in your produce section rise to the level of needing to do recalls because of multiple people getting sick or something else. And so just kind of keep that in mind. Adverse events is really anything that caused a return, product didn't taste the same, whatever. And so it is a very broadly determined mechanism. And so when papers are published that talk about the adverse events have risen, when they go on to the FDA's, open access sites to look at adverse events and serious adverse events, they see this significant rise. And you're like, well, that's a serious problem. Well, it could just be, and if you remember what I mentioned before about, so this one came out, by the way, in 2007, 17, well-intended, researchers, but, they use the CDC's poison control data. They 70% of these calls, they failed to kind of bring this out, were children under the age of 6, accidental ingestion of products. And yeah, there is a rise from 2002 to 2005. Compared to 2005, there was a significant rise in these, poison control calls. However, or adverse events, I should say, that were reported when they went to the sites. And what they failed to recognize, if you remember, in 2007 to 2010, GMPs were implemented. That made mandatory adverse event and serious adverse event reporting a requirement for dietary supplement companies. I often look at this and use this as this is an example that the industry actually was following the rules that were asked of them. And so bravo, there was a significant number of companies that were reporting. If food companies had to, and your grocery stores had to do the same, or restaurants, where you get food poisoning had to do the same, you'd see a rapid, an increase in that number as well. And so I got to bring it back to the automobile side. Again, there are multiple laws out there. And so it really does come down to whether somebody is going to follow the law, know that they're not supposed to be speeding through a certain, area, or they're going to come to a stop or a California stop, at a 4-way. And so, and if it is, to keep it in that perspective, is that there are those rules and there's multiples of them. And it really does come down to kind of the 3 musts to get this enforcement, right? You got to have the parties must adhere to the laws. There's obviously going to be people who are ignorant to it. And hopefully once they learn, whether that's through FDA, FTC action, some other legal action, that they begin complying. There's always going to be those actors in anything, whether it's in our cars, whether it's in dietary supplement industry, that just choose not to. And that's where you hope, the true hammer of the law comes down on people. The authorities have to be able to enforce, right? I mean, and so again, what I said before, FDA has never been fully funded, is not manned to enforce DSHEA, and DSHEA has never been fully enacted the way it is written. And so many of the laws that are on the book and regulations, that if they were just followed and adhered, there would be no need to add additional. And then third, and this was really my challenge for this group here, is the industry, and trade, has to establish and require standards, right? I mean, and so we can, as researchers, do a better job at being able to, as we test products in research, and understanding, some of this background when we are reporting on things or identifying different products and potential adverse events. And so this is kind of one of these cases when it's unfortunate. We see these a lot, some brilliant people, and I really do mean this, who I think that their hearts are in the right place, and they want, I want the same. I want my kids and my neighbors and every one of you to be able to go buy any supplement that's in a store, and know that what it says it contains in the label, and if they have an expiration date, is what you should be buying. It should be safe to consume. It should meet all those regulations and requirements. Unfortunately, I'm also realistic. There are a lot of actors who don't, right? But there are also a lot of great, brilliant researchers who aren't aware of the laws and also what can and cannot be done. And so when you kind of combine these great intentions, with really remedial expertise, these things end up in the press, and people make more out of it than it is. So, one of the things I would, it's very common, is that you see these articles will give kind of the I gotcha moments, right? I mean, so this is one, I would example. So these are, obviously water-banned substances, that are, this list down the left-hand column. The doses that I've put into the different cells are what these studies at the bottom, identified the presence of these banned substances being present, right? So I mean, by definition, if we are saying there should be no banned substances whatsoever, if that's the requirement for a dietary supplement, if that's what you believe, then these products that I'm about to show you, I mean, they should all be banned, right? I mean, these are the products that where those actives were were identified. And so we as a research community need to get better about understanding physiological spiking versus mere presence. Remember, dietary supplements are from foods. So it would make sense that anything from an animal source would likely contain many of these, hormone-based banned substances in some trace amount. Does trace amount mean efficacious amount? Absolutely not, right? I mean, but that's where more research is required. How much of a trace amount is required to cause a physiological effect? And then, mere presence shouldn't be what deems something adulterated. And so if that was the case, I mean, I wouldn't be giving cuties to my kids as much, right? I mean, they should be banned. And so we need to, as a research community, get better about understanding mere presence versus physiological spiking. I would challenge any researchers as well to do more research in that area. Like at what point, are these, is mere presence physiologically active, and so one of the papers that just really opened my eyes to this when I was running American Bodybuilding, and Andrien Dion was, being, on Congress with, certain of our Congress people wasting, millions of taxpayer dollars about, cheating in sports, from politicians. The great irony is that this paper came out. I have, and by the way, as a group, we really lost one of the OGs of this space, and really we all owe a debt to Dr. Don Catlin, the lead researcher on this, former, head of the WADA anti-banned substance testing lab, founded Banned Substance Control Group, BSCG, which does WADA banned substance testing now, third party. He recently passed away. Oliver, if you're watching, again, my sincere condolences. Your dad, we all owe just a great debt to him, and he opened so many doors and eyes for so many of us in the exercise physiology side, and that depend on clean supplements. And so again, my condolences to you and your family. This article came out. If you've never seen Icarus, you really should. Dr. Catlin is in that documentary, but this paper here, and nobody reads, the discussions and the results well enough. But the section off to the top right that I circle was one of my favorite things. He was such a brilliant and unbiased researcher in this space, is that he referenced that he gave a discussion on that of all these things that he had tested, none of them would achieve the threshold level that is allowed of adulterants allowed in OTCs and drugs. So OTCs and drugs have an allowable level of adulterant based on total weight. Because dietary supplements explicitly was void of any kind of adulterant level being allowed, it means mere presence makes an adulterant. And I thought his argument was just so well balanced. And you rarely see this, unfortunately, as more and more articles come out about adulteration. Nobody puts that in perspective, again, to come back to mere presence versus physiological spiking. And so I would definitely recommend you go back and read this, and a lot of, and so it's easy to do testing, right? I mean, nowadays you can, for banned substance testing, I use Informed Sport a lot. For the studies that I do, I have used a banned substance control group. NSF for Sport is another group that is used a lot.
Hey, Chris, sorry to interrupt you. In the interest of time, I need you to wrap this up if you can.
Last 2 pages. So
Okay.
So as far as for researchers go, from a testing standpoint, again, is what you're testing real? We do retest reliability, for our methods in our labs. Are we truly discussing what is, or are we making conclusions based on facts? I would say instead of trusting certificate of analysis that show up from the companies that send it to you, make sure to start utilizing third-party independent testing, or utilize your chemistry departments there at your universities to ensure that that the products that are being reported on or that you are performing testing on is actually what they're supposed to be. I did just a quick numbers on this, and this requires, kind of more detail on what a true quality specification looks like if you're a researcher and you want to send out for testing, but only the two of these 7 studies, in this most recent issue, where the methods are reported and the labs reported on where the third-party testing was done, both for QC verification, does it meet what's in the label? And then, secondly, on water-banned substance testing to make sure nobody's spiking the product they're sending to your lab for testing. And so just from a challenge, I would highly recommend that, and I'm happy to offer any help on that. I'd give you a couple of different resources. If you are a researcher and in need of some third-party analytical testing, Edgar at Diad Labs, owned by Miuru now, is just a dear friend, and have been used him for years. That's who I use for the studies that I invest in. And then for banned substance testing, either Informed Sport or BSCG, both Andy and Oliver's information is here. Definitely recommend that you reach out to them. A couple other resources to look at if you're unfamiliar with where to go. These inspections and actions, there might be warning letters on there. Don't let that freak you out. I think just like getting caught in a speed trap where you didn't know the speed limit, companies are free to improve. My mentor, Weeder, ended up kind of writing the book on a lot of that stuff after getting hit. And so, people can, have some grace if they learn from their lessons. So go and take a look, see if somebody brands you trust might be hit with warning letters and actions. And that's it. Hopefully that helped to some degree. By all means, reach out to me if you have questions. I want to say thanks again, Joey and everybody at the ISSN for the invite. Sorry I ran a little bit long there.